Go for it, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Bill. Bill was watching me, but for different reasons, because he was actually my ordination mentor, which meant that he was grading all of my papers. And he, from a human standpoint, held my future in his hands. So, Bill, thank you for your grace towards a young 22-year-old punk who thought he knew everything. But I owe you at least $20 or something like that. Buy you a soda, at least. Hey, it is great to be back. Wisconsin is in our blood. My wife is a Wisconsin native from Wisconsin Rapids, and it's great that I am not only able to be here, but they are able to be here. So this is my wife, Kathy, and our two kids, Eli and Olivia. And Eli and Olivia were born in 20 minutes from the shadows of Lambeau Stadium in Appleton, Wisconsin. And so they are diehard Packer fans, and we're so happy to see the sea of Packer jerseys in this place. And one of my favorite memories of Packer country is the first time that I took Eli to a Packer game at Lambeau Field, and he's 10 now, and he was like maybe 4 or 5 at the most, and we walk in the stadium, and it was like this rite of passage was happening, and all these old grandfathers came up to him and, "Oh, is this your first game, son?" And he'd be like, "Uh-huh," and they, and then they would like don him with cheese heads and Packer pendants and the gold and yellow necklaces, or the gold and green necklaces, and so I told Eli, I was like, okay, now every time we go again, this is always your first game, because we're going to make a killing selling this stuff on eBay. So anyway, so it is fun to be back. I do need to confess something, though, to begin with. Here we are at Missions Conference. Our theme is Generations on Mission Together. But I have to confess, I am not a missionary. And that's a bit of an awkward confession at a missions conference. But I'm not a missionary. I have been to over 40 countries. In fact, Kathy and I just recently came back from Turkey and Jordan. I actually did live overseas for quite a stint of time. But I'm not a missionary. I never learned another language. I haven't lived for a huge period of time in another culture and context trying to reach people, and as we would sort of define and qualify a missionary in today's age. So I'm not a missionary. So why am I here? Well, we'll get to that. What am I then? Well, first of all, most importantly, I am a man whose eyes, by the grace of God, have been open to my own brokenness, to my own fallenness, and to my incredible need for the forgiveness of God that comes through Jesus Christ. And more than anything else, I am the Son of God. After that, I have the privilege of being married to that woman and being a husband to Kathy and being a father to 2 great kids that I love a lot and I love doing life with. And then finally, after that, in this order, I am also part of this thing called Envision that Pastor Bill did a great job describing in terms of this newer initiative or ministry of this broader family called the Alliance. That this church is part of this broader family, or an older term, denomination of churches that we call the Alliance. And the leaders, or the mothers and the fathers of this family, have recognized the incredible impact that this generation called millennials is having both on culture and the church. That we can no longer ignore how this generation is shaping culture and church. I mean, you look at just in the last several years how a generation in the Arab lands using Twitter and social media has resulted in what we now call the Arab Springs. I mean, that's a very profound example, and there's many others that we could point to of the ways that this generation is impacting and shaping culture. And what we've done the last couple of days is we've looked at more the generational aspect of this missions conference in terms of how is this generation shaping our church, and what are the things that we need to be aware of as a church, as ABC here in Mequon. What are the things that we need to be aware of? How do we position ourselves? How do we rebuild bridges? This is the largest generation in the history of the world. Globally, this is the largest generation in the history of the world. It's also a generation that a majority of which is leaving our church walls. So Envision is a very personal thing because we're talking about our sons and daughters. We're talking about our grandkids. We're talking about our peers. That once promising young man or young woman in the youth group who had a faith and a commitment to Jesus Christ, and you meet them 3 or 4 years later and their faith is gone. So what do we need to be doing as a church to re-engage these generations? What do we need to be doing for the young adults and for the next generations that I see sitting here today? What do we need to be doing for them to equip them and cheerlead them and come alongside them and ultimately see them unleashed to do what it is and to be what it is that God has called them to do and to be? These are the questions that Envision is starting to ask with churches like this one. There's a lot of different things that we do to start to answer those questions. There's campaigns that focus on different social causes, like the Syrian refugee campaign that we've got going on right now. There's gatherings for intense discipleship to take place in international settings like London and Paris. We do short-term trips and we do internships and a whole range of stuff. But the heart behind this weekend has been this idea of generations on mission together. And you've been hearing that from your pastor. We've been discussing that in the previous days. Today I'm going to focus a little bit more on the missions aspect of this. And so I need to say again, in light of all of this, that I'm not a missionary. Or maybe I am. Let's see what God thinks about this. Turn to Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1. I'm going to go back to the beginning, which I'm told is a good place to start, and we're going to look at Genesis chapter 1 because I believe that in order to really understand and appreciate the idea of missions, the idea of God's mission for the world, that in order to capture what's behind the heart of this, we need to begin with creation and see the profound statement that God is making in the creation narrative. And as you're turning there, let me just pray and continue to commit this time of worship to the Lord. That God, I thank you that you are a speaking God. I thank you that you are God that desires to, even now in this moment, speak to your sons and daughters. God, I pray that you would take me out of this equation, that you would speak directly to them. Give us listening ears, God, not because it's me speaking, but because it's you speaking. Give us sharp minds to understand what it is that you're saying. Give us soft hearts to receive it. And give us courage, God, to live out what you're calling us to in this moment. We love you. We thank you for your grace and your mercy to us. We need you. Spirit, would you continue to overwhelm this place with your presence? In your name, amen. Genesis chapter 1, we're going to sort of fly through this, but I don't want, for those of you who are familiar with this passage, with the creation story, maybe you've seen it in flannel graphs since you've been alive type of thing, I don't want the familiarity of this story to cause us to miss what's happening here. And so to that point, this is going to be a little bit interactive. Okay, let's see if the second service does a little bit better than the first service, all right? And I need you to use your mind's eye. I need you to see what's happening. Okay, so we're going to work through this at a good pace, but we're going to make sure that we actually see what's happening here. Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. Then he separated the light from the darkness, and God called the light day and the darkness night. And evening passed and morning came, marking the first day. Okay, so on day one, what does God create? Light. Hey, good job. You started off. I had 2 people in the first service say it right away, so good job. Yeah, so he separates the light. He creates the light and separates the light and the darkness. Verse 6, then God said, "Let there be space between the waters to separate the waters of the heavens from the waters of the earth." And that's what happened. God made the space to separate the waters of the earth from the waters of the heavens. God called the space sky, and evening passed and morning came, marking the second day. So on the second day, what does God create? Sky, or another word we use is heavens. He separates the heavens from the water. So I want you to see in your mind's eye, here's day one. On day one, God creates light and darkness. On day 2, God creates heavens and waters. Verse 9, then God said, "Let the waters beneath the sky flow together into one place so that dry ground may appear." And that's what happened. God called the dry ground land and the waters seas. And God saw that was good. Then God said, "Let the land sprout with vegetation." And then he describes the vegetation coming down to verse 13 and God saw that it was good, and evening passed, and morning came, marking the third day. So on day 3, what does God create? Land and vegetation. Verse 14, then God said, let lights appear in the sky to separate the day from the night. Let them mark off the seasons, days, and years. Let these lights in the sky shine down on the earth. And that's what happened. God made 2 great lights. The larger one to govern the day. We call that that's right, enjoy it. It's going to be gone for a few months in a little bit. And the smaller one to govern the night, we call okay, you guys are with me? He also made the stars. God set these lights in the sky to light the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good, and evening passed and morning came, marking the 4th day. So on day 4, what does God create? Sun, moon, stars. Excellent. Verse 20, stay with me. Then God said, let the waters swarm with fish and other life. Let the skies be filled with birds of every kind. So God created great sea creatures and every living thing that scurries and swarms in the water, and every sort of bird, each producing offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply. Let the fish fill the seas, and let the birds multiply. Let the fish fill the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. So on day 5, what does God create? Birds and fish, or creatures to fill the air, creatures to fill the sea. Verse 24, last day. Then God said, let the earth produce every sort of animal, each producing offspring of the same kind, livestock, small animals that scurry along the ground, and wild animals. And that's what happened. Skipping down to verse 26. Then God said, let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish of the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground. So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So on day 6, what does God create? Humanity and animals, okay? Now, I want you to see up here, imagine up here the 6 different days of God's creation. And it's important to see in the way in which God is creating this profound statement that he's making both about himself and about his creation. Because what you see, what I want you to notice here is the order in which he creates. That on day 1, God creates the light and the darkness. But then on day 4, God creates the sun and the moon and the stars that go with or connect to what he created on day 1. On day 2, God creates the heavens and the water. And on day 5, God creates the birds of the air that go into those heavens and the creatures of the sea that goes into those waters. And on day 3, God creates dry land and vegetation. And on day 6, God creates all the animals that habitate that land and us. And so I want you to see the pairing in which these days, this order, the sequence of which God creates, that every day has another day that completes it. Every day has another day in which it is partnered with, if you will. Every day has a day in which there's this sense of wholeness. And when we see how God creates and the intentionality in how God creates, this informs us, well, of many things, but of 2 at least. First, it says something very profound about our God. That when God creates, he creates perfectly. When God creates, he creates completely and wholly. In other words, it's not like 2 weeks later God was looking over creation and was like, I forgot something. There's never been a moment in time when God looked at something he created and said, that was a mistake. When God creates, he creates perfectly and completely. But seeing this, it also reveals something incredibly profound for creation, for us. Because when we look at the 6 days of creation, when we talk about the week of creation, there's another day that we talk about, isn't there? Day 7. And when you come to day 7, what do we see God doing? We see God resting, right? We see God resting. And so if we look at the 6 days of creation and we look how every day has a pair, every day has another day that completes it, that matches it, that gives us this sense of wholeness. And then we come to day 7, we must be left with this overwhelming feeling and this question of, why is day 7 alone? Why does day 7 stand alone? What is the significance of day 7 that there would be no day 8 to complete it? I don't know about you, but I could use a day 8 in my week. So why is day 8 missing? What is the significance and the importance of what's happening on day 7? What we need to move past is we need to move past this understanding of rest where God is like chilling and kicking back in a recliner type of thing, with the flipping through with the remote. This is not the type of rest that God is engaging in on day 7. That when we read about the rest of God on day 7, it's more as if, imagine again, it's more as if God is turning back towards his creation, towards everything he's just created, and he's declaring over everything, and he's inviting everything and saying, this is what I designed you to be and to do. There is one reason I just created everything that I just created, and it's to be at rest with me. Day 7 is God's purpose statement for everything. There's a man much smarter than me that says it like this. His name is P.T. O'Brien. He says, Sabbat, which is the Hebrew word for rest. Sabbat implies completion or perfection in the sense of bringing a project to its designed goal. In other words, the notion of rest explains the goal of creation. God has entered his rest and has invited us to share that rest with him. Friends, day 7, it's important for us to see the days of creation because it sets apart the significance of day 7 in that on day 7, when God rested, God was declaring over us his purpose, his intent in designing us. To find our joy in him, to find our peace in him, to find our fulfillment, our sense of completion, our sense of perfection, our rest in him. Now, this is important because it becomes very personal for us, but it also gives us a real sense of purpose. Let me explain. On a typical Friday night in the Stewart household, when we're actually home, on a typical Friday night, what you would see us doing is watching movies. We love movies. My wife and I love a good story. And typically what happens is we set up a movie for the kids, and then Kathy and I go off and watch our movie, and so it's this great Friday night of not family bonding, watching our own separate movies. And we love really what we love is we just love a good story. And any director of a film will tell you that one of the most crucial elements of a movie or of a good story is this moment called the inciting incident. And the inciting incident is that conversation or that moment in a movie that just makes sense of everything else. It tells you why everything is happening in the first place. It gives you the reason why is Luke Skywalker fighting Darth Vader in the first place. Why does Tony Stark have to build the Iron Man suit to begin with? It's that moment that, to put it like this, if you miss it, the movie doesn't make sense, right? And have you ever been in that context where like that guy comes in, halfway through the movie and plops down on the couch and is like, what's going on? Who's that guy? Does she die? That's my mom. It's like, Mom, I've never seen this movie. I don't know if they die. Let's just watch and see what happens. But the point is, when you miss the inciting incident, you come to the end of the movie and you're left with this sense of, it was entertaining, but I don't really get what just happened. Friends, day 7 is God's inciting incident for everything, especially you. Day 7 is God's inciting incident that explains and defines the whole reason why we exist, the whole reason why we are created, and what we are designed to do and to be. And the fear that I have for my generation especially, but the fear that I have for every generation, is that we will come to the end of our days and we will look back at the arc of our stories, our life, and we will be left with this overwhelming sense of, well, it was entertaining at parts, but I feel like I just missed it. I feel like I wasted my life. Because we spent our lives consumed chasing after, pursuing whatever trivial, cheap alternatives that the world can offer us. Chasing after things that we think will complete us, that we think will fulfill us, that we think will satisfy us, that we think will bring us peace, that we think will give us validation, that we think will fill in the blank. And all the while missing the reality that the one thing, the one person in whom we find that peace and rest that we so long for is God himself. Kathy and I'm saying this when she's not around, and I'm saying this when she is around, so you can ask her if it's true. Kathy and I have a really great marriage. It's not perfect. I say stupid things all the time, but it's a really great marriage. I love this woman. I love her passion for Jesus. She inspires me to be a better man of God. We have a lot of fun together. It helps that she's really good looking too. So we have this great marriage. I love our family. But there are seasons or moments in my life where I am tempted to elevate our marriage or to elevate Kathy into a position that she was never designed to be in. And I look to her to do things for me, or I look to our marriage to be something for me that it was never intended to bear those responsibilities. And as a result, I bring ruin to both of us. Because I'm asking our marriage and I'm asking Kathy to do something for me that she was never created or designed to do. And I'm looking to something to do something for me that I was never intended to look to that thing to do for me. Does that make sense? In other words, fill in the blank with whatever it is that we look towards things that we were never intended or designed to look towards, to find peace, to find rest, to find fulfillment, to find completion. And we bring ruin upon ourselves because we miss the inciting incident. I mean, this could be a career. If I could just get one more rung up on the ladder, man, then I'll be happy. Then I'll be satisfied. If I could just get one more zero attached to my paycheck, then everything's going to be great. Could be our reputations. It could be material possessions. If I had that boat, then I'd be happy. Our families, we're really good at this as Christians. Okay, our families have to look great, they have to behave well, they have to know all the answers, they have to just, have that veneer of everything's happy and good all the time. And regardless of what it is, even things that in and of themselves are good, we elevate these things and we ask them to do something that they were never created to do. And we miss the very person in which we were designed to find the joy and the rest and the peace that we long for in the first place. So this inciting incident, this day 7, becomes very personal because it challenges us. Do we have the courage to step out, even for a moment, to step outside of ourselves and to evaluate what is the trajectory of my life? Am I pursuing things or other people or reputations or titles or accomplishments? Am I pursuing those things as my ultimate source of validation, of completion, of satisfaction, of fulfillment, of rest? And let me just say now that if that is your trajectory, that you will come to the end of your story and you will look back and be left with this overwhelming sense of, it was entertaining at parts, but I missed it. So this day 7, this inciting incident is very personal to us. But it's also very purposeful, because maybe you're asking the question, isn't this missions conference? The guy hasn't even mentioned missions once since he's really started this message. Or maybe I've been talking about missions the whole time. Because as you look at the world, all you have to do is step outside of this building. All you have to do is have an interaction with somebody in this building, and you know that this world is not at rest with God, is it? We are not at rest with God. All you have to do is flip on the 5 o'clock channel, the 5 o'clock news, and you hear of the ISIS, and you hear of the Ebola, and you hear of the tsunamis, and you hear of the shootings in Washington, and you hear of it all. You hear of the brokenness, the discord, the disunity between God and humanity. The brokenness between humanity and humanity. And in Genesis chapter 3, what we see, if you know the story, is you know that Adam and Eve, as representative of humanity, they were in this relationship with God, at peace with God, finding their rest in God, enjoying God, satisfied in God, with this design and intent of how to maintain the relationship with God. And in our arrogance, humanity, represented by Adam and Eve, shakes our fist in the face of God and says, "No, thank you very much. I believe that I can produce and find my own satisfaction, my own contentment, and my own joy, and my own rest without you, God." And in that moment, brokenness. Now, what's also interesting is that in that moment, God could have easily chose to move away. God could have easily chosen to just hit the restart button, to redo everything. But also in that moment of humanity's arrogance and rejection of day 7, God moves closer. And in that moment, God initiates his great mission to redeem and to restore all of creation back into day 7. God initiates this mission that says, okay, you've rejected me, but instead of me rejecting you, I'm going to move towards you. And he initiates this mission that has 3 major movements, the goal of which is to bring everything back into its original design, to be at peace and rest with him. This mission, the first movement of this mission, is the nation of Israel. This insignificant, no-name nation that we're told later God chooses for no other reason than his mercy and compassion. And he looks at this nation, he says, you are going to be my people. You are going to be my holy nation. And I'm going to be your God. And you're going to be for me a nation of priests. In other words, the role that Israel was to play, I want you to imagine the world just blanketed in darkness, blanketed, encompassed in brokenness. And the role that Israel was to play was to be this beacon of light shooting up out of the darkness. And the nations around them were to be drawn to the brilliance of their light, not because they were special, but because they were better reflecting the image of God around them. And so Israel was to be this beacon of light shooting up out of the darkness as part of God's invitation to the nations around them back into day 7, back into what it was that they were designed to be and to do. But if you know the history of Israel, you know that they didn't do so hot at this. Their holiness was compromised, and their light began to fade. But here's another amazing thing about our God, is that out of the ashes of our failure, he can set the stage for something even more wonderful and more perfect to take place. And out of this first movement of Israel and the failure of Israel comes the second movement of God's mission, which is his son, Christ. John chapter 1, verse 1, it talks about how Christ comes, the word is spoken, the word becomes flesh, and the light becomes life to mankind. And so where Israel was to be this beacon of light shooting up out of the darkness, the light comes down into the darkness. And Jesus Christ becomes the perfect expression of God's mission back into perfect rest and peace with him. Jesus is the perfect expression of the way, the truth, and the life. He lives the perfect life of righteousness that Israel could not attain to and that we could never dream of. He lives the perfect life of righteousness on our behalf. He goes to the cross and he takes upon himself the punishment that we so obviously deserved. He dies in a very real way. He rises again in a very real way, and he defeats the power of sin and death, and he ascends to the Father, and he sits on the throne, and it is finished. And Jesus Christ is this perfect expression of God's great mission to redeem and to renew everything back to the Father. So I asked, well, let's just end the story there. If I'm writing this script, that's a great place to end the story. Roll credits, right? The story doesn't end there, does it? Acts chapter 1, one of the last scenes of Christ's on earth before he goes back to the Father. He see this in your imagination. He's with the disciples. Hey guys, come here. Guys, come here. I've got one more thing for you. Come here. Peter, get over here. Come here. I got one more thing for you. And he looks at his followers and he says, you are going to be my witnesses everywhere. You are going to be my witnesses everywhere. And so where Israel was to function and play the role of a light shooting up out of the darkness, and where Christ was the perfect light coming down into the darkness, that we are to be the lights going out into the darkness. That we are the final movement of God's great mission before that last day when Jesus comes as conquering king. Before that last day, we are the final movement of God's mission to redeem creation back into day 7. Do you know what that's called, friends? Church. The church. The bride of Christ. If you get nothing else, get this. By nature of being a follower of Christ, you are on mission with God. You cannot separate those two realities. The question is never, am I a missionary? The question is, how much am I allowing the mission of God to influence and shape my life? So let me end with how I started. My name is Ben Stewart, and I am very much a missionary. Let me pray. God, I pray specifically over my brothers and sisters that you would give them courage. That on the one hand, you'd give them that courage to step back and to evaluate what are the things that I'm pursuing with my life, that I'm looking to provide me that peace and that rest and that sense of fulfillment. And God, if it's anything other than you, ultimately, I pray that you would give them the courage to shift dramatically what it is that they're chasing after. I also pray that you would give them courage that as they walk out of these walls, that they would realize that by nature of following you, they are part of your mission. That they would have the courage to allow that to shape how they live life, how they raise kids, how they conduct themselves in places of business, how they teach in schools, how they love their spouse, how they relate to friends, how they interact with strangers. That in the forefront of our minds would be this reality that by nature of following you, Jesus, we're part of your mission to return all of creation back to day 7, to peace and rest with you, Father. Give us the courage to live lives like that. In your name, amen.